The Hound returns. Arya wanders around Braavos, and we meet Lyanna Mormont. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. Particularly if you're a first-time viewer, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. This is an explanation of Season 6, Episode 7 of Game of Thrones, The Broken Man, in the light of all we now know. I'll pick out all the areas of foreshadowing and hints of what is to come, as well as explaining what was really going on at the time. Obviously, if you aren't up to date with the TV show, then be wary of spoilers. Unusually for Game of Thrones, this episode starts with a pre-credits sequence. We have the long-anticipated return of Sandor Clegane, the Hound. We last saw him apparently dying from wounds he suffered in his battle with Brienne, but in Game of Thrones you can't consider someone dead unless you've actually seen them die, and stay dead for a while. Anyway, the Hound is back. While he may be physically recovered, he seems to still be carrying the emotional wounds of a lifetime of brutality, and is being nursed back to health as part of a community led by Brother Ray. Brother Ray is an idealist in a land of biting realism, preaching love and tolerance and non-retaliation. It all seems rather blissful, and a long way from the dirt and blood and fire of the rest of Westeros. The show seems to have merged a couple of characters from the books here, Septon Merrybold and the elder brother, to create Ray. And although it's heavily hinted that the Hound also survived in the books and is trying to restart his life on the Quiet Isle as a hooded character known only as the Gravedigger, we don't know that for sure. So all that we see here in the show is ahead of the books. The questions being posed here are, however, the same ones that are being posed by the Hound storyline in the books. In Westeros, can peace and idealism triumph, or is violence always necessary? Can you start again, building a new life from the ashes of your old, or will you just revert to your base character? In the show, the Hound seems to have decided, but the viewers are left to decide for themselves. It will be interesting to see whether Sandor's time with the community has any long-term effects on his character, and indeed whether the books throw him back into the action in such a cruel way. Because it is undeniably cruel. Some renegades from the Brotherhood Without Banners seek to extort the community out of some food supplies, then return to slaughter them all when they won't or can't comply. These deaths cannot be defended as being collateral damage in a war. It is just unnecessary slaughter of innocent civilians. And the Hound, after discovering what happened, switches quickly back into his old mode, grabs an axe, and heads out to seek his revenge. In King's Landing, we see the implications of the massive political shift that happened in the last episode, which saw the Faith of the Seven and the High Sparrow come under the direct protection of the Crown. The central character behind the scenes in all this is Margaery, who is, let's not forget, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms and a massive influence on Tommen, her husband, the King. To the world, including it would appear the High Sparrow himself, she is a reformed character, committed to the faith, but she is still secretly just trying to protect her family, particularly Loras, who is still locked in a cell in the Great Sept. Here we see the High Sparrow plotting his next move. He threatens to arrest Olenna Tyrell, Margaery's grandmother, clearly seeing her as one of, if not the cleverest woman in the capital, and so one of the biggest threats he has left. He also encourages Margaery to have a child with Tommen, no doubt thinking that a new child and heir could be easily turned to the faith and would cement the faith's new role as the established religion. Through all this, Margaery keeps playing her part as the new convert perfectly, even when she needs to defend the faith to her grandmother, rejecting her pleas to come with her to Highgarden. Margaery instead begs Olenna to go back to Highgarden. She can't say why, but this is obviously because she fears for her grandmother's safety. The High Sparrow threatened her, and Margaery wants her out of his reach. This is Margaery taking on responsibility for caring for her family, rescuing Loras and protecting Olenna. So great is her disguise that Olenna only understands what is going on when Margaery passes her a note, a drawing of a Tyrell rose, to show that she is still her, not the brainwashed convert she appears to be. We should give Margaery some credit here. She has survived the deaths of 2 husbands, avoided having to do a walk of shame like Cersei, survived a brainwashing attempt, and managed to fool everyone from the High Sparrow to her own grandmother as to her true mind and intent. It is a wholly remarkable performance, and she would surely have succeeded in getting Loras out of the control of the High Sparrow, as well as herself and her grandmother, if it hadn't been for Cersei's dramatic intervention later in the season. Olenna clearly trusts her granddaughter completely, and leaves King's Landing as soon as she can. Cersei tries to stop her, making one last play to keep the Tyrells on side, but for Olenna, enough is enough. All courtesy is gone. She blames Cersei completely for what happened to her family by legitimizing the Faith Militant and encouraging the rise of the High Sparrow. Her only consolation is in Cersei's utter defeat and isolation, she says. Olenna is clearly right in her analysis of the situation, but as we'll soon see, Cersei is most dangerous when she is cornered. In the north, we see the Starks' attempts to rally their supporters for an assault on Winterfell. First up are the Wildlings, who join up relatively easily. They feel that they owe a debt to Jon for letting them south of the wall, and recognise that Ramsay will probably soon attack them anyway, so they might as well do it on their own terms. The Northern Lords, however, are harder to persuade. We've already seen that the Umbers and the Karstarks, 2 of the largest houses in the north, have sided with Ramsay, as have most of the others, so Jon and Sansa's options are actually quite limited. Their biggest win seems to be when they go to Bear Island to meet Lyanna Mormont, and even then it takes an intervention from Davos, pointing out the threat from the north of the wall, to persuade her to commit her troops. Of course, once she has agreed, she goes all in, offering up every single spare soldier she has, and even, as we'll see later in the season, travelling there with them. But elsewhere, things don't go quite as well. It's clear that Ned Stark's name still holds some sway in the north years after his death, which, as an aside, is a great testament to his character. So the team of Jon, Sansa and Davos are allowed access to Deepwood Motte to see Robert Glover, even though Ramsay would probably see that as an act of open rebellion. But Robert refuses to pledge any troops, instead sticking to a sort of uneasy neutrality because of a grudge from when Robb Stark didn't send any soldiers to save them from an attack by the Ironborn a few years previously. This is actually a bit unfair, as unbeknownst to all of them, Robb wanted to do this, but was persuaded not to by Roose Bolton, who was planning his own grab for power. Whatever the strength of the excuses, it's apparent that even after the Starks have rallied troops from loyalist houses in the north, they are still woefully outnumbered. Sansa urges spreading the net even further, trying to build an even wider coalition against the Boltons, but Jon overrules her, wanting to attack sooner rather than later, before winter truly sets in. To be honest, this seems a lot like Jon's apathy taking over. He doesn't really want war. He wants it over and done with as soon as possible, even if that means attacking with an outnumbered, hastily assembled and ill-disciplined army. Seeing the futility of arguing further, Sansa takes matters into her own hands, penning a letter to Littlefinger to take up his offer of using the Knights of the Vale in the coming battle. Remember, she had refused this very offer just a few episodes earlier. She wanted nothing more to do with Littlefinger, and this will undoubtedly leave her in his debt. So this action speaks volumes about how Sansa is developing as a character, and how she views Jon. She disagrees with him, and is willing to go against his lead in secret when she thinks she is right. Despite the warmth of their reunion, there clearly isn't a great deal of trust there. The other hope for Jon and Sansa's Northern Alliance is Brienne, who has headed down to Riverrun on Sansa's instructions, and again on the back of a tip-off from Littlefinger, to seek out the Blackfish's support. The Blackfish is Catelyn Stark's uncle, and therefore Sansa's great-uncle, so we might expect some sympathy for their plight, especially given the Tully house words of family, duty, honour. But what we also discovered last episode was that there are already 2 armies laying siege to the Blackfish and his army at Riverrun. The Freys, led by 2 of Walder Frey's sons, and the Lannisters, led by Jaime. We don't see Brienne arrive in this episode, but we do see the Freys' rather bungled attempt to force the Blackfish to give up the castle. They hold Edmure Tully, the rightful lord of Riverrun, and the Blackfish's nephew, captive, and threaten to kill him. But the Blackfish calls their bluff, forcing them to back down. Jaime, annoyed by their ineptitude, then takes over and attempts to parley with the Blackfish one-on-one. However, this is equally unsuccessful. The Blackfish, as well as being a formidable man in himself, is well dug into the castle, with supplies to last years. If Jaime wants to get back to Cersei soon, as he clearly does given how isolated she now is in King's Landing, he will have to try a different tactic. Over the Narrow Sea, we catch up with Yara and Theon. They have made it as far as Volantis, and Yara is clearly planning on allying herself with Dany in Meereen before Euron has a chance to build a new fleet and get there himself. The only problem appears to be Theon, who is suffering once more from a massive loss of confidence. He is slowly rebuilding himself after being broken completely by Ramsay, and obviously invested a lot of hope in Yara taking the Salt Throne, only to see it dashed before his eyes. This actually isn't about Yara, or whether she is capable of ruling. She clearly is. It's about Theon, and his road to redemption and self-acceptance. He thought that his intervention in the King's Moot would help repair some of the damage he had wrought, and when it didn't turn out that way, the little bit of self-respect and self-worth he had managed to build up by helping Sansa escape was pushed down once more. This is a useful reminder for us that redemption and recovery are not easy paths. Sometimes you need to regroup and refocus in order to keep moving forwards. This is what is happening here. Yara is able to help him recover some of what makes him him, albeit in a rather uncompromising way, telling him to set aside his guilt. She needs him. It is enough for now. Finally, we reach Braavos. The last we saw of Arya, she was hiding in the dark with Needle, awaiting the revenge of the Faceless Men for failing them once more. But now we find her wandering the streets, apparently without a weapon or care in the world, ostentatiously offering bags of gold to sailors in return for a berth on their ship, and then turning her back on the passers-by on the bridge as she stares at the sights of Braavos. At first sight, this seems ridiculous. Why would she be attracting attention like this if she were hiding from the Faceless Men? It led to several theories in the fandom community that perhaps this wasn't actually Arya. Perhaps it was the waif wearing Arya's face, for example. But on reflection, the most obvious explanation here is that Arya is just doing what it looks like she is doing. She wants the Faceless Men to see her. She wants to draw them out, knowing that a confrontation is inevitable. We'll see next week that her plan is to draw the waif out, then lead her to somewhere where Arya knows she has the advantage. And sure enough, in this episode we see stage 1 of this plan. The waif appears, at first in disguise as an old woman, and stabs Arya repeatedly. Arya escapes by jumping in the river and clambering out, looking visibly shaken and leaving a trail of blood for the waif to follow. This episode is called The Broken Man. In the books, Broken men is a term Septon Merrybald uses. It refers to normal people, farmers, merchants and townspeople who are conscripted to fight in wars they probably don't understand or believe in. It's one lord against another, and it's the normal people of Westeros who suffer. The broken men are those who are called up, fighting with kitchen knives, homemade swords or hoes, only to see their friends and neighbours die one after the other, and know that but for chance it would have been them. And they break, not able to face another meaningless, cruel battle, and not able to return home, or they will be killed as deserters. They flee into a life of brigandry and loss. They are the broken men. This is clearly a reference to the Hound, broken by war and trying to rebuild himself. But it could equally apply to Theon and his journey to rebuild himself. Increasingly, Game of Thrones is focusing on the real-world impacts of years of conflict in Westeros. And increasingly, our heroes, if there are heroes, are the cripples, bastards and broken things that Tyrion so memorably has a tender spot in his heart for. What do you think? What struck you about this episode? Did you spot anything I didn't? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to know when my next video comes out, then please click on the subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me in producing more videos like this, as well as getting access to more of my content, please click through to my Patreon page. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.